Hi friends, continuing to the chapter, The People of the Spark. What Torren planned. Torren heard the news from the old Sal, who came in the evening to have the doctors look at his infected eyes. They have been ordered out, said Sal, as Dr. Hester stood over him, pulling his eyelid down. The cave people. They have to leave the day after tomorrow. They can't be true, said the doctor. She dipped a spoon into a small glass jar full of unclear liquid. Tip your head back, she said. She dripped drops into Sal's eyes. It is true, said Sal. Ben told em to go. But how can they? Said the doctor. There is no place for them to go. Some of them refused, said Sal. They say that they have fight. He wiped his eyes. Ben said he would bring out the weapon if they did. The weapon, the doctor set the jar down on the table and started at Sal. Has Ben gone out of his mind? Don't know, said Sal. Torren listened from his place on a window seat, shivered with an excitement. There was going to be a war, right there in Sparks, and the terrible weapons would be used at last on the cave people. He had always wanted to know what it was. Now he has found out. Sal felt with a band-aid passed to his eyes. The doctor sat down at the table and stared out the window at the flame-colored streak in the western sky. How have we come to this? She said, but she didn't seem to be asking Torren. The look on her face caused a little fear to mix with the Torren's excitement. He didn't want to be in the war, he thought. He could get hurt. The weapon might accidentally get him instead of the cave people. He just wanted to see the war, not fight in it. Where will be the war? He asked the doctor. What? She looked at him as if she forgotten he was there. The war, he said, day after tomorrow. Where will we be? You are talking nonsense, said the doctor. If there is a war, it will be everywhere. She stood up slowly, hoisting herself with an arm on the table. Her face looked heavy, and she shuffled to her room without saying good night. Torren went to the bed and lay there for a long time with his mind racing. He decided he would get up before anyone else the day after tomorrow. The day the war would begin, he would get dressed. He would take a hunk of cornbread from the kitchen and put it in his pocket. He would take a knife too, in case the war came close to him. Then he would go down to the plaza and climb to the top of a big pine tree, so high up he had hidden from below. From there he wouldn't be able to see anything. Dread at the last minute. As plantain trucks drew near the village of Sparks, Lena was more and more impatient. She longed to see the Poppy and Mrs. Rudo and Doon. Another day travel, Felton said. We will be in Spark by tomorrow morning. Lena was too excited to sleep much that night. Her mind gallops forward to the people she would see tomorrow, and backward to the everyone she had been seeing on her journey. She finally fell asleep a few hours before morning, and when she woke up, she would feel immediately that something in the air had changed. A wind had risen, a warm, gusty wind that blended the brown grasses and rattled in the leaves of the tree. The blue of a sky has faded to a hazy grey, and heat seems to more fury than ever. She felt something unsettled in the air, a warning like the first trace of a fever when an illness is coming on. Could be nearly 100 degrees today, said Felton. But in a week or two, the heat will start to slack off. The season is changing. You can feel it in the wind. They started out early. After only an hour or so, Lena could see the fields and the buildings of a spark in the distance. She stood up. She was sitting on the front seat of a truck between the Mary and Felton, and shielded her eyes with her hand to see better, and shifted her eyes There it was, and now it looked like home to her. The solid little brown houses, the tidy fields around them. When they came to the road that led to the Pointers Hotel, Lena has a sudden idea. Let me off here, she said, and I want to tell Doon I am back. I will walk the rest of the way. She thanked Felton for all his help, and he thanked her in the return. Take a few of the things you found, he said. Whatever you like. She rumbled through the crate until she found the magnifying glass, the magnet, and the little red truck, and she tucked these into her packs. I will go into the town and help Felton with the raiding, Maddie said to Lena. I will meet you later at the doctor's house. Lena jumped down from the truck, her legs strong and sprinting, her hair flying in the wind. She ran up the road towards the hotel. She expected to see the people at the river washing and people sitting on the hotel steps eating their breakfast, getting ready for the walk. But the ground of an hotel was empty, and when she went inside, she found the people mining about the lobby in confusion. Some of them were crying. She saw the two Hoover's sisters, one wailing, the other trying to comfort her, and she saw old Nanny Proms sitting on a rolled up blanket, crumbling to herself. People were arguing with each others. She heard an angry voice, and the questioning voices, and the voice full of fear. For a second, she just stood looking, wondering what was happening. Then someone spotted her. What was happening? Lena, her name rang over the hub. Faces turned towards her, and the people rushed up to her and crowded around her. You are back. Where have you been? We thought you disappeared forever. She saw Clary's face, smiling, and she heard the voice of her friends from the school, and Captain Flurry of the Ember Messenger, and someone who used to work in the shoe stores. Are you still all right? They said. What a time to come back. Why did you leave? Where have you been? Hands reached for her, arms wrapped her in the hugs. She saw a red head bouncing up and down as the lizzies jumped in the air, trying to see over the crowds, and she saw Mrs. Foster beaming at her, and Miss Thorne at her side. I'm fine, she said. I'm so happy to be back. But what was going on here? And where is Doon? I'm here, it was Doon's voice. There he was, just coming down the stairs. She broke away from the welcoming crowd and ran over to him. He didn't speak, just reached out an arm and grabbed her hands. The look on his face startled her. Was he angry? Come inside. Come outside, he said. She followed him down a passage and out of a door in the back of a hotel. There was a small, concentrated terrace there, bordered by a low wall. Behind the wall, the drooping branches of a dusty tree stripped in the wind. Doon sat down on the wall and pulled her down next to him. For a moment, he said nothing. When he spoke, his voice came out in a rough shot. Where have you been? He said. Don't you know how everyone has worried about you? Don't you know everyone has thought you were dead? Lena shrank back. I didn't mean to go so long, she said. It was a mistake, I thought. Nearly a month you have been gone, Doon said. It was because of a city, Doon. I thought the city would be like those drawings I made. I thought maybe we could go there, all of us, and live there and be happy. She finished weakly. You could have told me you are going, Doon said. I might have wanted to go too. Did you think of that? I didn't really think at all, Lena said. I just saw the chance and went. But if I had though about it, she frowned. Remembering I would have probably had figured you won't want to come because you were too busy with that. That is Dick. Doon's face fell. Oh, he said. Well, you are right. I guess I was. I thought Dick might be. Doon stopped, looking flustered. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry too, said Lena. They were silent for a moment. Then Lena said, Shall we forgive each other? All right, said Doon. He smiled. Lena smiled back. But what was going on here? She asked. Why everyone is so upset? They have ordered us out, Lena. They have told us we have to leave tomorrow morning. What? Lena could not take this in. Who has to leave? All of us, all the people of Ember. And go where? Out in the empty land. We have to make a new lives for ourselves, they said, on our own. Lena's mouth dropped open. A wild confusion filled her mind. But how we can go? What would we read? What? Where would we live? Again, the frightening picture rose in her mind. The people of Embers scattered like the falling birds across a wet, dry landscape. There were wolves out there, she said, and the bandit. I know, said Doom, and it will be winter soon. Have you heard of winter? Lena shook her head. When Doon explained, her eyes wide open in the shock. All the time you have gone, Lena, they have done a terrible things to us. First thing was that boy, Torren. He told her about the smashed tomatoes that the Torren blamed on him. He said he saw you. Lena said, outraged. Why would he do that? Doon struggled, asked him. I don't know. He went on to tell her that what else had happened. They have thrown us out of their houses. They have written the hateful words on the walls. They have poisoned us with the leaves. But why? Why did we do them? Lena said. The wind blew her hair forward over her shoulders. She stuttered a handful of entangled strands to hold them still. We ate their food, said Doon. That was the main thing. But one thing had happened too. He told her about the riot in the plaza and about what happened at the foundation. Now, he said, they have threatened to use their weapons on us if we don't leave. So Tech says we will use our weapons on them. Our weapons? What weapons? Doon cited. For the first time, Lena noticed how thin he was. He saw the shadow beneath his eyes. There is so much to tell you, Doon said, and we have only one day. But I haven't even been home, Lena said. I have to see Poppy and Mrs. Mrudo. Are they still at the doctor's? Is Poppy all right? A scattering of her dry leaves blew against her leg. The wind waved up her hair. The whole world half changed suddenly, just in the last half an hour. Her throat tightened and she felt tears threatening. Yes, they are still at the doctor's, Doon said. Come on, I will give you with. We will talk there. Wait, said Lena. I have brought you a present. 2 presents. She rolled up the pack she had carried all the way from the city, took out the magnet and the magnifying glass and handed them to the Doon. This one is a magnet, she said. If you put it against the metal, it will stick there. I guess it is very useful. But it is interesting. The another one is for making the things bigger. I mean making them look bigger. Thank you, Doon said. He explained his presence curiously. He held the glass up and breathed through it at the back of a hotel. Looking at something small, Lena said, like a leaf or a bug. Doon riffled among the leaves on the ground and found an ant, which he had sat on the palm on his hand. Holding the glass above the hand, he looked through it. Oh, he said, look, you can see it needs and joints. And even he trailed off, absorbing in the looks. Then he raised his eyes to Lena. It is like a miracle, he said. He blew the ant from his palm and looked around until he found a beetle. Look at this, he cried. You can see it chewing. He tried a feature and a bit of an moth wing and a blade of grasses. This is much an amazing world, he said finally, putting the glass and the magnet into his pocket. I love it here, except for the troubles with the people. Lena and Doon went through the village and up the roads to the doctor's house. It was still every morning when they got there. When they came through the doors, they saw everyone at the table eating breakfast. Mrs. Morando was facing the door, so she saw them first. She stood up, her spoon still in her hand. She stared for a second, her eyes round, her mouth open, words trying to come out of it. Then she rushed towards Lena and wrapped her in a hug. At the same time, Poppy jumped down from the bench, dashed towards Lena, and hugged her knees. The doctor stood up and watched this reunion wide-eyed. Torren leaped up too, but not to hug Lena. He ran to the door and looked out, and then he cried, "Where is Casper? Isn't he here too? Where is he?" But no one paid attention to him. They were too busy fussing over Lena, asking questions and not giving her a chance to answer. "Where have you been? Are you all right? Why did you tell us? Do you know what's happening here?" Poppy yelled, "Yana, Yana, pick me up, pick me up." And the doctor, thrown into a state of an even more confusion than usual, murmured, "Some tea or let's see. Why don't we all? So glad you are." And all around the edges was Torren, pulling at Lena's sleeve, saying, "But why isn't it he here? Where is he? When is he coming?" And getting no answers. When things calmed down a little, Lena said, "Maddie will be coming soon. She stayed in the town to help the roomer for a while." Mrs. Morando stopped smiling and grew stern. "Lena," she said, "how could you go off like that and not talk to me first? And just leave the careless little notes, which was not, I would point out, true. 3 days, you said. It's been 28. That was a toughless, foolish thing to do." "I know," Lena said. "I'm really, really sorry. I didn't know I will be go so long." She explained how, when she overheaded the Casper, she had thought he said that a day journey, when really he said that 5 days journey. And then she said other things happened, and it looked a long time. "Yes," said Mr. Morando, "and we had a long, long time to worry about you." She picked up Lena's bag, with which Lena had dropped on the floor, and set it on the window seat. "And you know what happened here. You know we have been ordered to leave tomorrow." "I know," Lena said, "but I can't believe it is true." "It is true," said Morando. "It doesn't please me a bit. But what do you do about it? I don't know. Come and have some breakfast." Lena and Dawn sat down at the table where the others had been eating the raspberries and the cream. Though Lena was so thoughtfully sick of a traveling cake that all her real food should have looked good to her, she had no anticipate. Her stomach was in a knot. "I can't eat," she said. "I'm not hungry. I have to do and I have to talk." "At least take an apple," said Mrs. Morando. "First of the season," the doctor added, "from up the north." Lena looked the hard red fruit, and she and Dawn went outside. The heat was baking now. They went through the courtyard where the doctor planned the plots were almost empty. The plants have been either had put into the ground or dead. The one still there struggle in the heat, limbs or the brown. They crossed the road and walked down to the river bank. Even the river was surfing into heat. It is no longer flow deep and smooth, but ran in a stream between the exposed stone. Its edges were yellow-green and smelly. They sat on the ground. Lena said, "It would take me hours to tell you everything I have seen. But listen, this is the main thing. People had a beautiful city and they wrecked it. On purpose," said Dawn. "With wars, with fightings, it is horrible, Dawn." She shuddered, remembering. "That is a war," it is sort of an whispering to me. "There was a moment when I could hear the screams. I could see the flames, and there is nothing left. Almost nothing. And all the crosses the empty lands are their houses. Some, but they are old and falling down. Mostly it fields and the fields of in brown grass. There is howling animals. If we have to go to out there and try to live, well, we couldn't. That's why some people, a lot of people, wants to fight." Dawn told her about the tricks and the weapons he and his warrior had gathered. He explained the plan, how they would go into the village tomorrow, refusing to leave, prepared to fight. And he had told her about the terrible weapon the town leaders and threatened to use. Yes, Lena said. I have heard about the weapons too. Torren mentioned it one time. But was it it? We don't know, Doon said. If it is from the old times, Lena said, then it is so terrible that the tricks like the weapon would be like the twig against it. The two weapons, the old weapons could burn whole city. She clasped her arms across her stomach and bent forward. Everything inside her felt cramped, knotted up. Her hands were slick with a sweat. There can't be a war, she said. But we can't leave there again either, said the Doon. They sat watching the water struggle over between the rocks. Then the sun blazed down, burning back of their necks. Do you think, said Dawn, that is the fighting would be better than just giving in? At least it is doing something. I don't know, said Lena. It scares me. She ran her fingers over the glossy red skin of the apple Mrs. Morando had given her. I talked a lot to Maddie on my journey. She said at last she is wise, Doon. She told me that how wars get started. It's when the people says you hurt me, so I will hurt you back. But that is just that how the people are, said Doon. Of course, when people hurt you, you want to get back at them. And then they want to get back at you. And then you want to get back at them again. Only worse. It goes on and on. Unless someone stops it. Stop it how? You have to catch it soon, Maddie said. As soon as you see it starting, you have to stop it. Otherwise, it can be too late. But how do you stop it? You have to reverse the direction, said Lena. That is what Maddie told me. She said that if someone had been brave enough, the wars might not have started in the first place. But Lena Doom slapped his hand down on the ground next to him. What does that mean? How do you do it? Lena wasn't entirely clear about this. She took a bite of an red fruit the doctor had handed her. It looks as hard as a polished stone, but the juice that burst into her mouth was sweet. I think it is this, she said. She chewed and swallowed, instead of getting back at the other side with something just as bad as they did to you. Or something worse. You do something good, or at least you keep yourself from doing something bad. She took another bite of an apple. I think that it is. One bad thing after the another leads to the worst thing. So you do good things and then they turn it around. Don't cite her. That is not very helpful, he said. How are we supposed to do some good for these people who have been done so many bad things to us? Why would we even want to? Well, that it is, said Lena, wiping an apple juice off her chin. You don't want to, but you do anything. That is what it makes hard. Maddie said that it was very hard. It much harder to good than the bad. She said, so what do we do then? Said do. This tone was bitter. Say we will be happy to work without food. Say we will always be nice no matter what they used to do. No, said Lena. They can't be right. Or should we just go quietly out into an empty lands and not bother them anymore? No, said Lena. They can't be right either. She stared at the water rippling by. She was thinking hard. We don't want to leave, she said, and we don't want to fight. Do you think those are the only two choices? What else could there be? If we don't fight, they will make us leave. If we don't leave, they will have to fight. Lena discovered a tough part in the center of an apple, surrounding some brown seeds. She picked up the seeds with her fingernails. There must be some other way, she said. What if we all just sit down in the front of a hotel and refuse to move? We don't leave, but we don't fight. They would use their weapons on us if we weren't fighting. Would they? I don't know, said Doon. They might. I don't think they would, Lena said. They are not bad people, but we couldn't sit them forever. Doon said. Sooner or later, they had made us to leave. They have picked us all up by one and load us on a truck and drive us away. Maybe they wouldn't, said Lena. Maybe could talk and work something out. I don't think so, said Doon. Dick and his warrior would never just sit. They want to fight. Lena drew up her knees and rested her chin on them. Some good, she thought. What good act would turn things around? We could volunteer to be a roomers, she said. A whole lot of us. So they wouldn't have to feed us and we could bring the things back to them. We don't know how to be the roomers, said Doon. We don't have trucks or oxen. We wouldn't know where to go. We could say we will do all the worst jobs, Lena said. But that is what wouldn't be fair, said Doon impatiently. Why should we? That is no good. He stood up, collapsing the dry grass from his pants. I think it is too late for any of that. None of it's going to work. Lena stayed where she was, still thinking. She desperately wanted to find an answer, but no answer came to her. Her spirits sank and she suddenly felt tired. Well, then, we just have to be on the lookout, she said. Some changes might turn up. We have to watch for it. I don't know what else to do. She knew how weak and silly this sounded. But to her surprises, Doon smiled a little. That is like what my father told me when I was working in the pipe works. Pay attention, he said. It was a good idea then. I suppose it still is. Anyway, I guess it is the best we can do. Lena dropped her apple core on the ground and stuffed some more dirt over it, and then tuggered back to the doctor's house. Doon stayed there for a lunch instead of going to Pattett's, and then he headed back to the hotel. Lena meant to spend the rest of the day thinking as hard as she could about the choices she had to make tomorrow. She sat on a window seat sideways, her legs stretched out, and she tried to get her mind to produce an ideas. But she kept coming up against the two walls. Fight. She didn't want to fight. Or leave. She didn't want to leave. A slow fire buzzed against her the window. The wind trapped in the grape leaves outside. Think thought Lena, pay attention, and then she fell asleep. The weapon. Morning came. Don got up. He had to be ready for anything, so he rolled up his blanket and made a pack for all his clothes. Everything he had. His father and the other did the same. Downstairs out in the front of a hotel, people of Ember were gathering and swanning about, loud and distressed and confused. Dick roamed among them, urging courage, inspiring them to stand up from their right, telling them the time had come for the battle. His eyes flashed with a cold light. His voice rang out like the high, urgent tone of a bell. Very often the people he spoke to seems to catch fire from his words and be filled with an burning desire to the fight. Over half the people of an Ember joined with the Tick to be warrior. Some of them had wrenched the towel rack from their bath balls. Others grabbed the rocks or branches to use as weapons. They started down the road to the village, and the rest of the Emberettes followed in a confused mass. Doon went too. The morning sun, already hot, blazed down on him, and wind rifled his hair and his shirts. His mind was in a turmoil, his heart thudding like a fist in his chest. Dick and his warrior, carrying their towel racks, their snake pipers, their shard-offen glasses, strode like along, roaring their battle city. We will not go, we will not go. More and people picked up the chants as they came into the street of the village, and at the doors and the windows faces appeared. Shocked faces and people still in their night gowns. They shouted to each other, look, the cave people are coming. They are coming into the town. Other windows flew open, and the doors, and the people stepped out into the street, unsure whether to be angry or afraid. All the people of an Ember had came. No one stayed behind to wait for the truck that would take them out into an empty land. All of them had to know what was going to happen. They had to be there whenever it was. They poured into the plaza and stood packed together, the warrior roaring with the other nervous, some of them half hiding in the doorways or hiding behind the trees, afraid of what was going to happen, not sure if they wanted to be part of it or not. Tick roared out his challenge. People of a spark, we refuse to leave. We are here to make our demands, fight off our stares. Surely, he thought, no one was in here. Were all outside, dealing with the army of Emberties. He ran up the stairs, and at the top he found himself in the tower room. It was a square room with a window on all the sides. A table stood in the middle with a straight back-and chair around it. Down below was a plaza swarming with the people. The noise was like the roar of an water. Dick was at the front of a crowd. Don couldn't see the top of his head like a shiny black stone, and his steel rod glinting in the sun. Straight below were the steps of a town hall and the top of an head of a three leaders. To be his right, the window were partially blocked by the branches of a great pine tree that stood next to the town hall. When he looked out the window towards the rear of a building, he saw the town hall roof below. This was perfect. He could see what was going to happen. He could hear too, because the window was open, and he realized if he stayed here, he wouldn't have to decide whether he was going to fight or not. This seemed a bit like cheating, but it was a relief too. The thought of taking the parts in a bloody brawl had filled him with a dread. Standing to the side of a front window, Doon looked down. Right below him was a Ben Brallow. He could see the wiry grey hair on the top of his head and his hand waving furiously in the air. Mary Waters and Williams Dent had stepped upon behind Ben. Many tried to take him by the arms, but he shook her off. He made his hand into an megaphone of his mouth. We will not be threatened, he shouted. We are in charge of this town. It is our place. We build it. We own it. He yelled so loudly that his voice rasped and cracked. You are destroying our life. You must go. The crowd rumbled. They pressed forward. Clouds came over the sun, and a vast shadow swept across the plaza. You may try to make us leave, shouted Dick, but we are here to stay. This air seems to be queer with a rage. Or was it just the wind? Everything was moving. The clouds raced overhead. The branches of a tree trashed. The Emberities raised their motley weapons. Up on the roof of a tower, the flag of a sparks waved and snapped on its pole. Doon could hear it, though he could not see it. He felt like the wind rolling through his mind as well. His father's word came back to him. When the people fight is over, what do we have? A place dressed all. People who hate each other standing about it all. In the tower, he had a strange feeling of being separate, belonging neither to one side of the fight nor the other. Whose side was he is on? Not on the Ben, certainly, but not on the Tick eitherly. With his warrior calling out the threats, eager for a fight, Ben held up his hand and shouted again, We want you, and we are ready for you. His voice was hoarse. I will give you one last chance. You will leave or not. With his head thrust forward and his hand tightened into his fist, he waited for the answer. No, screamed the Trick. His army plowed it out with him. No, never, no, no. Ben dashed to the door of the town hall. Wilner went with him, and together they darted inside. Drawn force, afraid they might climb up the tower. But they came out on the step again right away, pulling off things of black metal that ran on the wheels. For a moment, the clamor of a crowd ceased as they craned their necks, trying to see over each other's heads. Doon had a good view from where he stood, but still he had no idea what the thing was. He knew it must be a weapon, but it looks almost like a great black insect. It stood on a black iron legs. It had complicated black iron body nearly as long as the trucks, stubbed up with the hooks and the boxes and the points. A narrow scarf of an rigid metal hung across it. It was ugly, Doone thought, like the skeleton of the monster. Ben turned the things so that it pointed out over the crowd. He stood behind it, his feet planted wide apart. "This is your last chance," he shouted at the crowd. "Despair or take the consequences." Mary Waters dashed towards him. "No, Ben," she cried. "We can't do this." Ben pushed her away. "We agreed," he cried. "Stand back, Mary." Now the crowd in the plaza sensed danger and began to push backwards. Dick cried, "Stand your ground," but Doone saw him take a step back too. Ben squatted at the rear end of the weapon. "Leave now and take your gang of an hoodlums with you," he shouted, "or I fire." "Fire," thought Doone. What does he mean? It was clear that the Dick didn't know either. "You have one weapon," he shouted, "but we have many," and he raised the route in his hand, and behind him a warrior did the same. Ben gave a furious shout. He was crouched over the weapon. Doone saw his bend back and his arm jerking at the mission. Nothing happened. His arm jerked again, harder. At the same time, Mary rushed forward. She aimed a powerful kick at the nose of a weapon, bumping it upward, and the weapon in a harsh machine voices began to chatter. It went, turning its snout back and forth. People in the crowd began to scream. Doone couldn't see at first what the weapon was doing. What was the point of its loud, a furious shuddering? The noise was horrible, but the weapon was staying in one place, not flying out into the crowd. Was it shouting? Someone offered. Yes, across the plaza, over the heads of a people. Doone saw a line of holes punching into the wall, splintering a window. But the weapon suddenly stopped its chattering. Doone looked down and saw Ben give it a furious shake and shake it again, pounding on its noise to aim its lower as the crowd yielded in panic and scrambled backward. And Mary shouted and tried to rush towards Ben, but Wilbur grabbed her arm, and then the weapon exploded. No chattering this time, just a spot of fire that shot from the weapon rear end knocked Ben flat on his back, and Stu pulled the weapon forward so that it stood on his nose. This made the fire shoot straight upwards, a column of bright orange, shattering sparks and reaching towards the branches of a pine tree that hung over the town hall steps. From this place in the tower, Doone watched horrified. Where was his father in that frightened crowd? Where was Lena below him? The pine tree was on fire. The building would be on fire too in a minute, because the tree stood right up against it. The smoke was already curling through the windows. He had to get out. And then that was when he heard a scream, not from the plaza, but from somewhere above him. A bird, an animal in the pine tree. A second later, an echoing scream arose from the crowd. Doone heard someone's cry. The tree. Up in the tree. Someone there. Doone was at the door, ready to flee down the stairs. But he heard the scream again, and it sounded close. They darted back into the tower room and ran into the window that faced the tree. The lower branches of a pine tree were a mass of flame. He could hear the rush and the roar as the fire raced among the dry needles. When he tried to gas his upward, he saw what was screaming was about. A boy was clinging to the branches a little higher up than the tower roof, hugging the trunk of a tree and screaming in terror as the fire swept upwards. Kenny, Doone thought. Was it? He couldn't tell for sure, but he knew he couldn't leave him there. Maybe somehow he could get him in through the window. He opened it as far as he could. It was the kind of a window that slung outwards on the hinge, and then grabbed one of the chairs from around the table. Holding it by its back, he thrusted it out from the window far as he could. "Climb down," he shouted to the boy in the tree. "Climb down quick." The boy saw him, and with a start Don't realize who he was. It was Kenny. It wasn't Kenny at all. It was Torren, the one who had started so much trouble, the one who had pointed a lying finger at Doon. For one furious second, Doon felt the urge to leave the Torrent to his fate and get himself out of the tower as fast as he could. But he pushed that thought away and shouted louder, "Hurry, get down here." Torrent clambered down through the branches, down towards the flame beneath him. When he was opposite the tower's window, he was still too far away to reach the ledge of the chair. He edged out along a branch, but it was a slender branch, and the bent under his weight. "Jump!" Doon yelled. "Jump and catch the chair legs. I will pull you in." Torren climbed backwards to where the branches were sturdy. He stood up. Then he froze. He stood clutching the tree trunks, staring down at the flame, his mouth a dark O. "Jump!" screamed the Doon again. Smoke was pouring into the tower room now. "Hurry, you can do it." A gust of wind, the flame leapt. Now the branches just below Torrent's feet were blazing, and suddenly he made up his mind. Doon could see the moment of decision in his face. He clasped his hand tight. He fastened his gaze to the chair dangling over the window, and then he pushed himself away from the trunk with his hand and flung himself towards the tower. His hand caught the rung between the chair's legs, and the Doon's whole body was yanked forward. He almost lost his grip on the chair, but not quite. "Hang on," he yelled. With all his strength, he yanked the chair upward, and when the Torren hands were within reach, he grabbed one of them, and then both of them, letting the chair topple back into the room. One last heave, and Torren was in the tower room, shaking so violently he could hardly stand. "Now," said Doon, "let's go." He headed for the door. Over the sill of a window Torren had just come through crept a row of flame like a sharp orange claws. Firefights. Lena was on the other side of a plaza, farthest from the river, when the tick called out his demands, and Doon yielded. At least listen." When she heard his voice, she tried to make her way towards him, but the crowd was so dense and turbulent that she couldn't get through. Tick's warriors were everywhere. The sun flashed out of their steel rods and pipes and jagged the pieces of the glasses. She was burning her way among the dozens of shoving and shouting the people when Ben fired the weapon. She heard the sound, a chain of loud pops, and the people in the front of her screaming and scrambling backwards. Lena ducked and put her hands over her head. She stayed that the way as the people pressed past her and scrambled over her. And in the moment the popping noise stopped, then there was a bang and more shouts, and when he dared to stand up and look, she was that time the pine tree was on fire. The flames were small at first, creeping along just one branches with sudden flashes as dry bunches of prime needles caught fire. But in the second, the flame grew bigger. They crept and crackled. Black smoke rose into a pillar into the air. The crowd pressed backwards, crashing against each other. The people of an ember, for whom fire was rare and terrible danger, stared upward with their eyes wide and their mouths gaping. Some of them screamed. Some were too frightened to make a sound. Such a terror came over Lena that she couldn't move except to stagger a few feet back along with the crowd. Her eyes were filled of the flames. The terrible orange hand reaching up into the branches of a tree. A voice in her mind screamed, "Run, run!" But she couldn't run. Her legs wouldn't work. It was all that could do just to hold her up. A voice cried out, "Someone in the tree!" And Lena looked up through the smoke just long enough to see the upper branches crashing and get a glimpse of someone white moving them. Then she was surrounded again by the struggling people. She stepped over a piece of pipe rolling over the pavement and fell to her knees. When she managed to get to her feet again, the mass of people had pressed back behind her, and she found herself near the front of a crowd. One On the step of a town hall, she was bent, lying motionless, Sparkle on his back. Wimber bent over him, and Mary Broder shouted, "Fire trucks! Fire truck!" The fire had leapt from the pine tree to the town hall tower, flames licking up its wall. That's what when Lena heard a wild laugh from behind her. "Let it burn," someone cried. "Let it burn. It is their punishment. They deserve it." She recognized that voice. It was they. Others took up the cry. They shouted, and the chorus of her voice raised a harp, trumpet, cheer. The people of her ember were back together, far south end of a plaza, now as far as from the town hall and the fire as they could get. A few ran into the street to get away, but most of them waited to see what was going to happen. They stayed at a safe place, distance hovering between the terror and fascination, and watched as the flame streaks up the sides of the tower. The people of the sparks were running in all the directions. Shopkeepers grabbed the bucket and ran to the river and filled them with the water, but most of the fire was high above their heads, impossible to reach. They flung the water into the air and then stood up with an empty bucket, watching the tower burn. The two fire tugged arrived, their drivers standing up and lashing the oxen to make them taut. Water shoshed from the big barrel on the truck's bed. As soon as the truck stopped, people jumped up onto them, grabbed the bucket, and began dipping the buckets into the water. Fire line, they cried, wept up. And the villagers who must have participated in this many times from the struggling lines stretching out to the from the tugs of an edges of the plaza. Burning twigs broke from the pine trees and blew up in the wind, and new fires started up here and there. The people in the fire lines flung water in all the directions, but for the few flames, each bucket of water doused it. Seems too new one sprang up. Lena's heart was beating so hard it drowned out all her thoughts. She wanted to run, to get away from here. But something paralyzed her. Part of it was a fear of the fire. Part was a fear of something else. Fear of an idea that was trying to come from the surface of her mind. She didn't want to hear it. "Pay attention," a voice whispered to her. She tried to put it away. Faster and faster, the people on the truck dipped the bucket into the barrel, dipped, filled, and handed the bucket to those in the line, who passed them along from the hand to the hand. The past person in the line, the one standing nearest the flame, flung the water, which hissed and steamed and put out on a few flames. Tick and his warriors, along with the rest of the people of an ember, watching all this as if were a frightening but fantastic show. Tick and a few others cheered, but mostly people just gasped goggle eyes as the flame blackened the town hall. When the wind blew sparks down towards them, they shivered and pressed back the farther. Lena scanned the crowd. Where was Dune? Where was Mrs. Murdo? She didn't see there either of them. She could hardly see anything. Smoke filled the air. All she could see that was a shadow tumblet of the people. Only the flames were bright. The pine trees was a column of fire within it. Lena could see that the tree black skeleton, when a great branch broke off and fell crashing into an scrubbery below and settling it all right. A terrified clamor arose from the people of Ember, and now instead of pressing backward, many of them turned and ran. Lena stayed where she was. She felt as if she were being grasping by the two her huge hands. One pulled her backwards away from the fire, back towards the street of a town, though which she could run too fastly. The other pulled her forward into the danger, urging her to do what she suddenly knew it was right. It was the good thing. It was what she had been waiting for. But she didn't want to do it. "I can't," she thought. "I don't want to. I'm too afraid. Someone else will do it. Not me. Not me. I can't." At the moment, the tower collapsed. Its walls crumpled, the roof caved in, and the flame shot up from the hole. The flagpole came hurtling down like an spear. The blackened walls leaned and toppled, and then a fire was everywhere. Flaming branches and the stuff of an needles brown from the wild wind landed in and dry grasses at the edge of the plaza, and in the trees by the rivers, and on the thatched roofs of an market stalls. There, cried the people, in the bucket line, pointing. There and over there. The lines twisted around. The bucket traveled faster and faster from the hands to the hands, and those at the fronts of the lines tossed with the water this way and that. But there was too many fires and not enough people to keep up them. It is now, thought Lena. I have to do it. I will do it. Quickly then, before she could change her mind, she ran. She ran with an hammering heart, with her head down and her hand in the first. She ran as if fighting a power mind, out across the plaza by herself, and where she reached the nearest bucket line, she paused her way in. Territor, she heard a voice behind her. It was Tick's voice, the voice like a cutting blade. Lena heard it, but she paid no attention. Territor, Territor, Tick cried again, and his warrior echoed him, Territor. They yielded, jumped backwards when the spar flew too close. Don got out of an tower just in time. He had to almost throw the Torren down the stairs and then take them three at a time himself. Torren ran off somewhere as soon as he went out the back door. But Doon dashed around to the plaza, staying close to the market stalls, and joined the crash of an embarrass at the south end. Painting, he stared back at the ruin he had escaped from, the backspine of the pine tree, the smoldering boards of an town hall. He watched as the flames consumed the building and the tower collapsed. He saw the fire lining smashes among the scattered blazes, and he heard Tick's laugh ringing over the clamber, burn, burn, yield, take, and the other voice climbed in him with his. Let it burn, serves them right. For a moment, Doon stood up there, stand his mind a blank. It seems that a war against surged around him, but not the war he had imagined. Where did he belong in the battle? Who was his enemy? Where were his friends? Noise and a confusion assailed him. His eyes stung, his legs were shaken, and then he saw Lena break away from the crowd and run across the plaza. He heard Tick and his warriors screaming, Territor, and then he felt as if suddenly his eyes had opened, although they had been closed, and he had awakened from a bad dream. The air around him seems to become clear. Strength returned to his legs. He edged between the people front of him, burned out of a crowd, and ran the same direction as Lena, towards the fire line, and seeing what Lena and Doom had done. Others followed. Clary pushed through the crowd and ran forward, and Mrs. Mundo went after her, taking her long, quick stride and holding up her skirts. Then came back the Hover's sisters and Doon's father and a fragile Miss Thrawn, and 5 more people and 3 more after that. They ran with their hands before their mouths or their arms over their heads, shielding themselves from the smoke and failing embers as they added themselves to the bucket bridges and began hauling water. More and more of a people of an ember followed. At last, the only one not fighting the fire was Tick, and a few of his men. Wearing a half stubborn, half frightened expression, they clustered at the far end of the plaza, shouting, Traitors, now and then, with their useless weapons dragging from their hands. Surprising truth. Fighting the fire was so hard that Lena forgot to be afraid. Everything but the firefighting was erased from her mind. Her hands reached for the next bucket, over and over and over, and when a warning cry arose, she would look up to see whether the danger was a dart out of its way. The water in the barrels soon ran out, and the rear ends of the lines had to move back to the scoop water directly from the river, which means a longer distance from the buckets to the travels. This line snatched left and right, moving to follow the wires, which sprang up in dry grass like a crop of terrible weeds. In the smoke-dimmed air, People looked like a ghost swarming ever which lay, shouting at each other's. Once Lena caught a sign of an doom. He had jumped into the fountain and was bent over, as if fishing with his hand for something at the bottom. He jumped out again, soaking wet, and in the moment the fountain begins to overflow, and the water spread, running towards the flame in the grass at the plaza edge. Oh doom, hooray! The Lena thought. She was Maddie too several times, appearing and disappearing in the swarm of firefighters, sometimes calling out the instructions or the warnings, something just passing along the buckets, her hair flying in the winds. It was the wind they found against as much as fire. It blows in an unrustly gust, and the flames leaned up and stretched before it, reaching for new things to burn. But there was a twist, as many people fighting the fire now, and before the long people began to win. The flames became flickers, put out with a shovelful of dirt or a flash from a bucket, and finally no trace of an orange remained in sight. The plaza was a landscape of ashy puddles and smoulders black heaps, looking strangely open without the town hall and the pine tree. Then for a moment people just stood and stared at each other. All of them had a smoke darkened face and ash dust hair, and a damp, grimy clothes. The people of an ember were just as crabby as the people of sparks. Everyone looked more or less the same. Lena went searching for the doom. She couldn't find him, but she found Mrs. Murando sitting on the ground at the north end of the plaza. Her burn had a slit all the way off the top of her and was hanging beneath on one ear. Her skirt was dotted with the burn holes. Are you all right? Lena asked her. I believe so, Mrs. Murundo said. And you? I'm fine, said Lena. Yes, you are. And Mrs. Murundo, giving Lena a long look. Very fine indeed. She held out her arm. Help me up, she said, and we will back to the doctor's house and get ourselves decent again. When the fire was out, all the firefighters were exhausted and wet and dirty. Doon discovered that his legs felt shaky again, and he went down through the village streets until he found a shady place under a tree where he could sit for a while. People tugged by him, heading for their homes, and the people of an ember passed to going back to the hotel, which that moving they could thought that they might be leaving forever. Doon didn't call out to anyone. He felt too tired even to talk. He just wanted to rest a minute before facing whatever was going to come next. But he hadn't been sitting there very long before he saw Kenny coming up the road. And when Kenny spotted him, he came over and sat down. I saw you, he said. You pulled Torren in from the tree. Don nodded. I know, you are very kind of a person, Kenny said. Bits of an ashes sprinkled in his blond hair, as if someone had sparkled the pepper on his head. What kind? Said Don. The brave kind, Kenny said. Good kind? Not like the other boys. What other boys? Kenny leaned back against the trunk of a tree and stretched out his legs. The one who has willing for a fight, people to fight. That is one with the pale eyes. Tick, said the bone. Yes, I knew he wasn't a good one, ever since I saw him in the woods that day. What day? Doon said. That is the day when he was out there with the bags on his hand, Kenny said. Doon turned to stare at Kenny. Bags? Why? What? What was he doing? Cutting the vines, said Kenny. What kind of vines? Doon said. His heart was starting to pound. Well, I wasn't close to him, I'm not sure, but it was something he didn't want to touch, I guess, like the poison oak. Poison oak? Why would he cut the poison oak vines? I heard what happened, said Kenny, about the leaves on the hotel steps, though they thought we did it, but I don't think so. Don't thought that we were racing. He was remembering the things, how Dick had an itchy path on his arm day before the snuff appeared on the hotel step. How he had led the clean-up but didn't participate himself, and how he had smuggled on his neck this morning that "Go back to your cave" was written on the hotel walls. How he had striped everyone's up, fed their anger by reminding them of those The two attacks were over and over again. And as if his mind has been full of clouds, but now was clear. He understood. Dick needed all that anger and outrage. The more upset people were, the more of them would want to fight. And the more fight there were, the more people of the Dick to lead. Dick wanted the power, he wanted glory, he wanted war, with himself in command. He had raised his army by attacking his own people. Don was breathing fast. His hands were cold and shaky. He knew suddenly that his changed everything. I meant that the people of Spark had not attacked the people of Ember after all. This fierce and suspicious had made them unkind and selfish, but except maybe for an moody words in the plaza, they had not attacked, and if they hadn't been the writing on the walls and the poison oaks, there probably wouldn't have been the riot in the plaza, and if there hadn't been the riot, the two leaders might have not decided that Embers had to leave. Don't jump to his feet. Startled, Kenny said, "What is the matter? You have told me something important." Don't said. He held out a hand and pulled Kenny up. I have to. What did he have to do? He had to talk to someone. He had to explain. I have to get going, he said to Kenny, and he headed back up, rode towards the village center again, thinking about whom he should talk to and what he should say. The doctor was standing out in front of her house with a Poppy at her side when Lena and Mrs. Morando arrived. Poppy came galloping towards them. "Yana," she yelled, I saw Fisher. Are you hurt?" Dr. Hester asked. "Yes, tired," said Lena. "And dirt," said Morando. Dirty, said Poppy, tucking at Lena's skirts and trolling along beside her. Torren was sitting on a sofa with his feet in a tub of water. "What happened to you?" asked Lena. "I got burned on my feet," Torren said. "On your feet? How did you do that?" "You did see," said Mrs. Morando. "See what?" said Lena. So Mrs. Morando told her. "I don't know why Doon was up in the tower to begin with," she said, "but it was a lucky thing for Torren that he was." Lena raised her eyebrows at Torren. "Doon told me what you have said about him. Aren't you ashamed now that he had saved your life?" Torren didn't answer. He stared down at his feast. "You lied," Lena said. "You blamed Doon for something he didn't do." Torren slumped down into the sofa pillow. "He didn't throw those tomatoes," said Lena. "He would never do such a thing. Why did you say that he did?" "It was a mistake," said Torren in a muffled voice. "Well, who did then?" "Someone else." "Who?" "Just someone. I'm not telling." "You are telling something, though," said Lena. "Maybe you won't tell you who did do it, but you have to tell the Doon didn't." She shuffled through the clutter on the table and found a scrap of paper. "Here," she said, hanging it to the Torren with a pencil. "Write on here that you had told a lie about Doran. Sign your name." "Thank you."